New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Good evening, and welcome to the Miracle of Prosperity here on the New Thought Media Network. I'm your host, the Reverend Dr. Jim Webb, author of the book, The Soul of Prosperity, as well as other books, including 30 P's to Prosperity, Prosperity from A to Z, Building Your Self-Manifesting Vision Board, and Forgive Your Way to Prosperity. So each Sunday night, we come together and we look at all the different ways that we can remove any barriers to the prosperity that already exists and is waiting for us to claim it. And we also look at ways that we can enhance our prosperity practices. And we look at prosperity in a broad way. We look at prosperity not just as money and stuff, but we look at professional prosperity. For example, in the words of Florence Scovel Shinn, where we have an excellent job with excellent pay, where we provide an excellent service in an excellent way. We may look at relationship prosperity, where our relationships are outer reflections of inner love, inner cooperation, and inner harmony. So we develop those things within so that they show up in our relationships. We may look at logistical prosperity, where we can make our lives just work better with fewer hassles and struggles and with more ease and effortlessness. We may look at resource prosperity, which might include money and stuff, but it is simply having all the resources we need to live the happy, joyful, and fulfilled lives. That may mean resources such as support, resources such as time, resources such as financial resources to make our life journey easier. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So tonight we've got a special show. As I mentioned, sometimes we work on eliminating barriers to the prosperity that already exists and the prosperity that is waiting to embrace you. Well, as you know from my book, The Soul of Prosperity, we look at your inner saboteurs, those parts of you that are in your unconscious mind that can sabotage your prosperity. And as I was rereading that chapter recently, it occurred to me that the focal point for all your inner saboteurs is the inner child. And if there is one thing that you can do, and if there is one thing that you can work on to open yourself to the prosperity that you deserve and desire, that is to heal and transform your inner child. Because that is the largest part of you saying no when God is saying yes. So that's what we're going to explore tonight. We're going to explore your inner child your gateway to prosperity. So we're going to first start by understanding your inner child a little more so that we can understand how to heal and transform your inner child. Because you see, we may have very skewed ideas of our inner child, but just so we have a common understanding, our inner child is the part of our consciousness that is the amalgamation of our early childhood experiences, the lessons that we learned, how we interpreted those experiences, the trauma, the happy parts as well. And that consciousness that crystallized as a child is still working. And quite often, that consciousness that crystallized as a child is still working, but unfortunately, it's working against us. So I want to begin with a story. I want to begin with a story of a client. This client was preparing for her wedding. She had met the man of her dreams, and she was preparing to be married, and they were preparing to buy a house. And she found that everything she did was getting in the way of those goals. She bought this fabulous wedding dress, but she found herself gaining weight inexplicably, and she couldn't stop gaining weight. And no matter how much she tried, she kept doing everything she could to gain weight. And then the money they had saved for the down payment, she found herself spending it on wedding stuff. And so she was unconsciously sabotaging her life's dream. And so we had to work on that. And we realized that she wasn't sabotaging her life's dream. Her inner child was sabotaging her life's dream. Because you see, we realized that when she was 8 years old, that very tender stage, her mother remarried. Her mother remarried a man who had already had a son. Now, when her mother remarried, she moved to a different school. She was the skinny, strange girl. She was bullied. And at home, her mother had to curry favor with her new husband and his son. The son was rather stout, and the home seemed to glorify being stout. And she was bullied in school for being thin. And so that part of her realized or believed that in order to survive without pain, she had to gain weight. And she had to move. She moved to a new school. So that part of her was absolutely traumatized from moving. So what happens? 25 years later, she's getting ready to get married. She's getting ready to move. But her inner child says, I'm not moving. Her inner child says, I'm not getting married because the last time I saw someone get married, it hurt me to my core. So her inner child was actually sabotaging her life's dream. And the point of this is that our inner child might continually drive us into a ditch. And then we're wondering, how did I get here again? So I wanted to bring one of your favorite guests and one of mine on to talk about healing and transforming the inner child, because the inner child is the gateway to our prosperity. So I've brought on today a very special guest, and you can guess who it is from my background, and that is Edward Miller, the author of the book, Uncovering and Embracing Soul Power. Hello, Ed.
Hello. I'm so glad to be here. You know what? This is my favorite subject. I teach on inner child work, so I'm so excited to share this podcast with you on the inner child.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and we see from the story and from all of our experience what a pernicious effect on our prosperity the inner child can have. Quite often, the inner child is running the show, and we are not even aware of that.
Absolutely.
So how do we become more aware of the inner child, Ed? And
I think
is?
I think that's an interesting question. How do we become more aware of the inner child? First of all, the inner child is real. He exists. We are our 2-year-old self. We are our 5-year-old self. We are our 12-year-old self. We are our 19. We are all that same. Now we are now in a space and time that we feel we're more adult. We feel like we're
Those
more.
parts of us live within us. Is that
Yes.
accurate?
So these inner children we look at as unprepared. They were emotional. They were wounded. So we don't give them, in our mature, aware selves, much credence. We're busy, trying to distract ourselves from them and their effect on us. But because they are real, we need to now develop a new relationship with our inner child.
And I want to drill down on that a little bit, Ed, because one of the key misconceptions we have, that many people have about inner child work, is that they're summoning up some fictitious external part of them versus a part of them that is the lion's share of their formative consciousness.
Yes.
So let's drill down on that. This child is alive. This child is within you. This child is making decisions for you. This child is still hurting, and this child is lonely. Would that be accurate?
Yeah. Whenever you're feeling triggered, whenever you're feeling overwhelmed, anxious, whenever you're feeling fearful, those feelings that generally are a product of our unresolved inner child issues.
Yes.
And we can start looking at ourselves in a new way when we realize that it's the inner child that's wounded. And if we're able to reparent, reconnect, develop intimacy with that inner child, we can help to grow it up.
Yes.
And develop a new relationship with ourselves and the world in a very dynamic way.
Yes. One of my favorite coaches, Ian Levin, when anyone goes into trauma, one of the first things she asks is, how old are you right now? And she immediately directs people to the part of them that is still acting out the trauma and the pain of the inner child. How else can we begin to get in touch with this inner child and what is?
Do you mind if I tell just my short story of how I gained intimacy with my inner child?
Absolutely.
I was and this is just a short. I was a fat kid, and I grew up in a household where everybody was achievers. Everybody was top of the class, admired, looked up to. And I was a little fat kid that had reading disorder. And was in the lowest reading group, if you guys remember those reading groups. So I saw myself as struggling, even as 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And I saw my family appreciating intelligence and being bright and being capable. And I felt that wasn't me. So then I grew up with a distorted point of view. I felt I was not enough. I felt I was inadequate in some way. Yes. And I spent my youth trying to get away from that, trying to hide from that, trying to distract myself from that feeling. Well, then I evolved into an adult, and years pass, and I still am triggered by many of the feelings of inadequacy that I had as a child. And as an adult, successful, worldly man, to have these intimate feelings of insecurity and inadequacy, it never made sense. So I was always perplexed. I didn't know what was going on with me. I felt I had a lot of things I wanted to accomplish in this world, and there was a lot of good that I was creating and being part of, but I felt wounded more often than anything.
Yes, and I want to just pause right there for a moment, because I know that all of our listeners, all of our audience can identify with this. And in my book, The Soul of Prosperity, I look at one point where we realize that everybody on the planet, for one reason or another, at times has felt not enough.
Yes.
Everyone has felt like they are left-handed in a right-handed world, and
Yes.
something is wrong with them. And quite often, as you say, it relates to our inner child. So that's how you felt. So how did you gain intimacy with your?
Well, I realized that there was something wrong with me, because I couldn't feel happy. I couldn't feel accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everything I did, everything I actually did accomplish, I played down because I wasn't able to feel adequate.
Okay.
And this was in my, you know, I'm in my 60s now, but this was in my 40s. And I decided, and I had decided to explore inner child work.
Yes.
And what I did was I got in there and I started reconnecting with that little boy.
Yes.
The little boy that felt inadequate, the little boy that was bullied, the little boy that was lonely.
Yes.
I started reconnecting with that boy and nurturing that little boy.
Yes.
And telling him how beautiful he was and how much he means to me now. And as I changed my relationship with that little boy, and I also put a picture of him on my cell phone, so I can always look at him and nurture him and remember how adorable he was.
Yes.
So energetically, I really opened up an intimate connection with my inner child and spent the rest of the last 20 years just nurturing it. Yes. Now, that nurturing of my inner child changed my life. It changed my relationship with my family. It changed my relationship in my business. It just made a big impact on me. It made me more peaceful. It made me, the biggest thing that came from my inner child exploration is it made me more aware. I started having a better understanding of what my feelings were and why I was feeling what I was feeling.
Yes. So in other words, the inner child was the gateway to your emotional state many times because your inner child was determining your emotional state.
Absolutely.
And the reason that this is so important is because your emotional state, your energetic state, is the state that either attracts or repels your prosperity.
Absolutely.
And when you are aware of an emotional state that repels your prosperity, you can address it.
Yes.
And when you are aware of an emotional state that attracts your prosperity, you can enhance it. And this is one of the ways that you practice your prosperity. Now, one of the things that I want our viewers to understand is that this is a process, somewhat like taming a wild animal.
Yeah.
The child at first is so hurt, so wounded. And this is very important. In the beginning of the inner child work, that child is so distrustful.
Yes.
Where have you been? You abandoned me. You left me here all these years to hurt. And it's like taming a wild animal. It needs consistency. It needs a steady flood of love that it can trust love instead of what it learned to trust. It learned to trust pain. It learned to trust rejection. It learned to trust its not enoughness, as opposed to learning to trust that love was in infinite supply and always available to it.
Yeah.
So why don't you share with our audience a little bit more how that is a long and ongoing process, not a one and done?
No, it's not a one. Well, first of all, just being aware of your self-talk is a big deal because we're not aware of it. We're not aware of it. We say, oh, well, I'm not really smart enough, or I really didn't work hard. We can be so critical of ourselves, and we don't. It becomes a habit.
Yes, and actually, we don't even hear what the inner child is saying. We just act on it without hearing, and it's like, why did I do that? Because at first we're not aware that that's the inner child saying no when God is saying yes.
Well, when we find ourselves saying there's something wrong with me, that's who we're talking. We're telling our child that we're inadequate.
Yes.
So we have to be careful.
Okay.
And have a real diligence when we're straying away from when we're betraying our inner child, because he's been betrayed a long time.
Yes.
And he's not going to trust us unless we be careful with our child.
Yes. So it takes that, there was this analogy of how do you tame a wild animal? The first thing you do is you spend a day sitting in its peripheral vision. The next day you move a little closer. The next day you move a little closer. The next day you move a little closer until the animal gets accustomed to you being in its energy field. Yeah. Then you move closer, and little by little you two do a kabuki dance, and eventually that wild animal will let you touch him, and eventually you will tame that wild animal. Is it like that with the inner child as well?
Oh, yeah. And another thing, as you bring joy into your life, because your inner child is your joyous side of you also. It's the
Yes.
side of you that's playful, the silly side of you that we spend our lives suppressing and disowning.
Yes.
Well, if you're going to reconnect with your inner innocence, reconnect with your playfulness, reconnect with the silly side of you, and start nurturing that and feeling good about that, and
Yes.
find opportunities to express play in your life, because that's nurturing your inner child too.
It's very true. And let me share with you something. If you come from an oppressed community where survival was your main focus, whether it was economic suppression or whether it was emotional suppression because of a dysfunctional household, one of the things you may not have learned is the value of play. Because play was deemed frivolous when your function was to survive. And we can't emphasize enough the value of letting your child play, letting your child dance, and letting your child express itself.
Yes.
Been stifled.
Well, and another example is letting your child be sad if they're sad. Because when we're sad, often what are we doing? I don't want to feel that way.
Right.
I'm not that guy. But in reality, the child is sad sometimes.
Yes. And perhaps that child has been discouraged from expressing those emotions too. How many times have we heard, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry for? So there is a lot that we can do to reclaim, heal, and transform the inner child. Now, I worked with John Bradshaw for decades in doing his work. And what I want to do when we come back from break is I want to look at all the different tools and techniques that we have at our disposal to heal, to reclaim, to embrace, to relanguage, and to energetically transform the inner child. So that's what we're going to do when we come back from break. And we're also going to take questions from our viewers. So viewers, let us know you're here, and also let us know what questions you may have so we can address those after the break as well. So we're going to go to break, and we'll be right back here on the New Thought Media Network.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hefferland Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Kitchener, Unity Spiritual Center Ottawa, Om Center for Spiritual Living, Satya Center, Begin Within Ministries, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and the Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for being part of the New Thought Media Network. Please like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.
What if the person you think you are is just a fraction of who you truly are? What if years of conditioning and surviving in a challenging world have left you clinging to strategies and beliefs that mask your truest nature? I'm Catherine Duca, psychotherapist and self-esteem coach, and you're listening to Who Do You Think You Are? A show that looks beneath our psychological masks and uncovers our profoundly messy, beautiful, brilliant, tender-hearted essence. Join me as we go in search of the hidden power of our true selves. I'm so glad you're here.
And we're back here on the New Thought Media Network, and we're discussing healing and transforming your inner child. And what we've discussed so far, for those of you just joining us, is that the inner child is the amalgamation of the experiences, what you learned or maybe even mislearned from those experiences of your childhood, the pain, the trauma, sometimes the happiness as well, and how that shapes your worldview, and how that worldview can either aid or thwart your prosperity, and how sometimes the inner child's wounds may be causing you to make decisions that are counter to your prosperity. So our task is to understand the inner child and its influence and its power over you, heal the inner child so its negative influence no longer damages you or sabotages your good. And Carlisa, at 13 minutes after the hour, had a very interesting question, and that can help us to get into the how. How do we do this? So let's bring up Carlisa's question at 8:13. And Ed, why don't you read that and let's discuss that a little bit. And the operative part of it is the last sentence, how. The last
needs of growing child.
Yes.
Yes. Well, when we start to pay better attention to our emotional states, and we start to pay attention to our triggers and what makes us behave in ways that we somehow are dishonoring ourselves or not or betraying ourselves. When we start to pay attention to that, it gives us the insight as to what we might need to do in order to reparent and give compassion to our inner child, because that's what it's really all about, giving compassion and reparenting your relationship with your inner child. And that's
so let's look at how we could, some of the ways that we can do that. How do we become more aware of the inner child, its dialogue, and its influence on us? Do we meditate?
Well, I'm a firm believer in meditation. I've been meditating for a long time, and I've used meditation as a way to reconnect with my inner child. But I don't want to say that everybody has to meditate to connect with their inner child. I don't want to say that some people just don't want to meditate.
Right. What are the other ways that we can?
The other ways are, as I said before, becoming aware of your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't have to meditate to become aware. Awareness is just putting your attention, stop putting your attention on what's wrong out there in the world, or what somebody did to you, or what somebody should have done or shouldn't have done. It's putting your attention on your feelings, on your heart, on your tender heart.
Yes.
When it's breaking, when it hurts, when it feels excited and thrilled, and when it feels insecure. I mean, we need to put our attention on that without judgment.
Mm-hmm.
The moment we put judgment on it, we're then going back to the same exercise of condemning and judging our inner child. And it sends him back into the cave.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So becoming aware of your inner emotional state at any time. And one of the things that can help with that is one of the tools that Ian Levanzant uses, which is, when you're feeling something, ask yourself, how old are you right now? And you might realize, wait a minute, I'm not 34, 44, or 54. I'm 4 right now, because I'm feeling the same way I did at 4 years old. And I am thinking the same things I thought. And I am acting on misinformation about my ugliness, my undeservingness, my weakness, my wrongness. I'm acting on misinformation that I got at 4 years old.
Yeah. Well, how else do you learn to know about what you're feeling unless you ask yourself in the moment, how am I feeling right now? And being real clear with what's going on inside of you.
Yes.
You know, I'm feeling jealous. I'm feeling abandoned.
Yes.
And be able to assert that without judging it.
And let's look at some ways that we can release our judgment from it. A Course in Miracles, lesson 189, all things are lessons God would have me learn. Anytime you are having any type of feeling, it is sacred.
Yeah.
It is an opportunity to heal. It is an opportunity to grow. And that is why we're here. So embrace any feeling that you have, for it's a barometer. God wants you to be happy, joyous, fulfilled, confident, peaceful, and joyous. So anytime you're feeling something other than that, that's an invitation to grow. It's an invitation to more God. It's an invitation to more light. So,
but it's not an invitation to judge.
Right.
What we often do.
Yes. Yes. So don't judge it. Embrace it.
Embrace it.
Yes.
Embrace
God
it.
does not condemn. So
be compassionate with that child.
Yes.
That child part of you. You know, like when you are in these uncomfortable situations and you feel like you're being threatened, you know, be aware that that's the child being threatened.
Yes.
That's the child feeling threatened.
Yes.
That's the child feeling overwhelmed.
Yes.
And if you can, at that moment, say, oh, everything's going to be okay. You're fine. You're great. You know, you're strong. You're capable. And it's really that kind of self-talk that helps you. You know, your inner child, and start allowing yourself to feel that when you say those things.
Yes. And create the safe space for that child. And that's why this repetition and that's why this constancy is so important. You know, just like when we do prosperity work, we create our prosperity workshop. Well, we also must create a workshop for our inner child, a safe space, a safe room for our inner child.
Yes.
A safe room where our child feels valued, a safe room where rule number one is to listen to the inner child, a safe room where the child becomes adept at receiving the love its heart has yearned to experience. So one of the exercises, or one of the hows, is create a safe environment for your inner child. Perhaps you had a chaotic environment growing up. Perhaps you had a confusing environment growing up. Many of our viewers are adoptees or foster children, or live in households that changed during their childhood. So that child may need more than anything a sense of comfort, safety, and security.
Absolutely.
So building that space for your child repeatedly can be extremely useful.
Yeah, I agree.
What other tools can you use?
Well, one of the things I wanted to be careful with people is that people tend to have patterns in their life, and they often put themselves in the same vulnerable situation over and over again. And then they go back into the cycle. You know, I'm hurt, I'm disappointed, I'm let down, I'm abandoned. But that's them putting themselves in that situation. You know, when you're being compassionate with yourself, when you're being careful with yourself, you're careful with the environments you're in too.
Yes.
You don't hang around people that are not in your best interest. You don't participate in activities that trigger you and make you feel inadequate. You allow yourself to nurture yourself instead of pushing yourself out there, like the mother pushes the baby out of the nest. You don't push yourself out of the nest. You know, you let yourself nurture it more.
And this is so important because as a child, you didn't have the autonomy to get up and leave.
No.
But as the adult, you do. And that's where adulting the child or parenting the child comes in. And so let's introduce the idea of all the different ways we can protect, support, nurture, and reparent the child to give it the strength that it lacked when it was vulnerable.
Yes.
Because I work with my clients a lot on all of this, and it's just amazing what it can do. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, well, you know what? Because I changed the relationship with myself, and I stopped being harsh and judgmental. And I started being more careful about the environments I'm in. And I started being really careful about the self-talk. My inner child started expressing itself more to me. I started hearing it more.
Yes.
Instead of, when that voice comes up, if you're not parenting your child, you're disregarding it. You're surprised, he doesn't, I'm not that guy. I don't feel that way. And I think that as you become more aware, you accept yourself emotionally.
Yes. Many of the clients that I've worked with, they, one of the exercises that I do when I work with clients is I do sessions where I give their inner child permission to just speak at random.
Yes.
And it's amazing. And I actually used to do this. When I was a kid, I remember just talking and it seemed like gibberish, but it was on my mind. And I allow them to give their inner child, permission to speak at random. It's like the floor is open and it's yours. And the more they have a chance to speak, the more they feel heard, the more they feel safe, the more they feel nurtured, the more they find their voice.
Yes.
And that's very important.
It is very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's extremely important. I now would call myself joyous. I wouldn't have called myself joyous 15 years ago because I didn't know what joy was. I felt more duty than anything else because I was the one that was responsible for everything.
Yes.
But as I became more intimate with my vulnerable sides and was more prepared to encourage myself and it, things changed. I got braver. Yes. I got more resilient.
Yes. So the key here is to understand for our viewers, there is a wellspring of joy within you.
Yes.
That has been suppressed, denied, beaten back, beaten down. It has lived latently in your inner child, waiting to be freed. Create a safe space for that inner child. Access the light of Creator, the light of Source. You can call it Chi, life force. You can call it Santa if you want. But as an adult, as a responsible adult, you, as a sentient, responsible, healed adult, you can take that energy, that chi, move it through you, direct it to the inner child, to those places where the inner child has been heartbroken.
Yes.
Places where the inner child has not felt confidence, to the places where the inner child has yearned to feel love, acceptance, and embrace, and has felt abandoned and betrayed instead. And each time and let's call it channeling, if you will, each time you channel the light that your powerful sentient adult has become adept at calling forth, each time you channel it to the inner child, that child heals just a little.
Absolutely.
Feels a little bit more confident,
yes.
A little more sure of itself, a little more deserving of its good, and a little bit more ready to remove itself from unsafe situations, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So those are some things that we can do.
And I think it's also important too that we realize when we're doing inner child work, we're not blaming anybody.
Yes,
we're not blaming our mother. We're not blaming our environment. We're not blaming auntie for spanking us that time. We're not doing any of that. What we are doing is we're becoming aware of when we were in those moments, when we were vulnerable, how we felt.
Yes.
And it's nobody's fault that we felt that way.
Absolutely. And this is so very important. And this is one of the other reasons, because in the literally thousands of clients that I've had over the last 30 years, one of the biggest blockages that they cite to doing inner child work is, I got to do that shadow work. And they have gotten so used to blaming someone else that they think, if I do inner child work, I've got to take responsibility for myself. And it's not taking responsibility. It's reclaiming your power.
But it's also taking responsibility too.
Well, yeah, it's taking, I have been responsible for this, but I will not condemn it or blame myself.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So responsibility without the blame. Quite often when we think of taking responsibility, we equate responsibility with blame.
Yes.
But that's because we've learned to condemn certain of our feelings.
Yes.
But when we release the condemnation, responsibility can come without blame. And so it's no longer what Aunt Aggie did to us. It's now, this is what I experienced objectively. This is how I felt. And this part of me still feels this way. And this is the truth and the light of God that can cause me to feel something different and do something different and see something different and allow and create something different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
let me make one short story. You know,
yes.
I had a harsh mother,
Uh-huh.
loving but harsh. You know,
Mhm.
she didn't say things sweet. She wasn't a sweetie pie where she'd say, "Oh, my baby." That wasn't my mother.
Mhm.
So I was pretty harsh with myself.
Okay.
And I realized that I grew up not being tender with myself.
Mhm.
So I had to learn how to reparent myself
Yes.
and give myself the intimate reparenting that I wasn't able to necessarily get from my family. And that didn't make them wrong. And
Yes.
once I started reparenting myself and becoming, you know, that level of intimacy, my relationship with my mother seemed to change.
Yes.
Even though she had been gone,
Mhm.
I saw her differently.
Yes.
I never saw her as the abuser, which
Yeah.
I, in my youth, felt like she was just harsh and mean and all of that. But I started seeing that my mother was a great woman for teaching me strength and endurance and
Yeah.
clarity. And I got that from her.
Yes. A Course in Miracles indicates that a miracle is a shift in perception.
Yes, it
Now,
is.
one of the things that will happen as we work with our inner children is our perception will shift.
Yes.
And it is not only our perception of ourselves, but it is our perception of the others as well.
Absolutely. I
And
agree
you
with
just
that.
cited an excellent example, Ed, because quite often what will happen is as you become more aware of your inner child, what your inner child went through, one of the other things that happens almost by default or by osmosis is that you become aware that others have been acting out of their wounded childhood.
That is so accurate. Yes.
And
Yes.
I
We're all wounded children.
right.
Yeah.
John Bradshaw makes a very good point of this. And we recently had a set of breakthroughs. We went on a retreat and we recently had a set of breakthroughs. And one person's breakthrough was that she healed a relationship with her mother that she never thought she would heal because her mother had a very difficult time expressing love, appreciation, or even respect for her. And that had wounded her for years.
Yes.
And she had gotten to the point where, oh, no. And when the loving, healing guidance would say, we're going to work on your relationship with your mother, girlfriend would would stomp out of the room. But something happened. And the miracle that happened, the shift in perception, was part of it was that she started seeing her mother as her wounded child, the child traumatized by bombs blowing overhead in World War II, the child traumatized by coming to some strange new country where they spoke this strange pidgin Italian, and all of a sudden, the parts of her that had learned empathy and for herself learned empathy for this wounded person who had wounded her.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
a miracle ensued. And so I want to share that one of the things that we can do when we create the safe space for ourselves and our inner children, at some point, and I do this with clients, at some point, you might want to invite someone else into that safe space so your children can play and heal together. And that's a key barometer of the degree of healing that you may have experienced.
Yeah, I agree. You know, what you were saying, it made me think about how as I became more intimate with my inner child, I started having more and more intimate friendships.
Yes.
And I started requiring more intimacy in my relationships.
All the layers of defense started coming off. and the love started streaming in, and you felt like I want to be my undefended self. I want to be my authentic self. I want to be my fully alive, fully loving self with me and with the world.
Yeah.
And what I have is what I choose and what I see and what I desire. And so you wanted it with all your friends as well.
You did.
Yes. Once all those defense wounds, let's call them. Once all those defense wounds are healed, your joyous child comes out.
Yes.
Your confident, loving child comes out. The child that only wants to love and be loved comes out. And that kind of experience is what you then require in your world. And your world begins to reflect that to you.
Yes.
So
you ever meet anybody, Jim, that was that seemed very defensive and guarded?
Yes.
And you realize that there's a part of them, and they tell you, I mean, their stories are usually about, how hard it was for them and how, what they had to endure.
Right.
But because I've done the inner work, the inner child work, and working on my vulnerability, I see the opportunity for them.
Yes.
And as a life coach, I point them toward new ways of seeing it.
Absolutely.
New ways of reconnecting with that inner part of them so they can see it differently also.
Absolutely. And they can experience the miracle of prosperity.
Yes.
It begins with a shift in your perception. That shift in your perception often begins with a shift in the perception of your inner child.
Absolutely.
We're going to come back and we're going to do some more of this some other week, because we've just scratched the tip. We've just seen the tip of the iceberg of the work that we can do to create prosperity through our inner child. So this has been wonderful. And I know you're working on a lot of stuff, Ed. What are you working on these days?
Well, I have an event, a week-long event I'm doing in Arizona, and I'm really excited about it. I'm going to be doing a lot of inner child work with the group, and we're going to do some of the other things I teach, which is the Ho'oponopono, because I used Ho'oponopono as a tool to reconnect with my inner child. So, we're going to be teaching that a little bit at the workshop also.
Okay. And so how can they get more information on this workshop, Ed?
Well, you know what? I will present it to you.
Okay.
The workshop is at the first week in May in Arizona. And and I can get you more information on it, and I'll get it to you specifically, because I love to invite people to the workshop. It's still openings available.
And you'll put it on your website too.
Yes, I always put it on my website. Excellent.
So you're working on some interesting stuff.
Yeah, I'm always working on interesting stuff.
Oh, good. You're always working on interesting stuff.
Yeah. I'm a blessed man.
There you go. Yeah, I'm working on some stuff too.
What are you working on?
I've got 2 new courses, and I know this may sound like hyperbole, but I've never been more excited, because some of the breakthroughs that I just told you about, they're just the tip of the iceberg of the breakthroughs that are available. We are in a time of miracles. And what that means is stuff that you've been wrestling with and dealing with for 3 decades. There is now enough light.
I love it.
To heal it. So what we're going to do is Spirit is going to help us on key specific issues. We're going to do an issue a week, issues like healing family trauma, where you can ask questions of Spirit. Spirit will direct specific energy to you to finally heal at a very deep level family trauma. We're going to do family trauma 1 week. We're going to do sexual shame, sexual guilt, and sexuality 1 week. We're going to do 1 week of healing the inner child. We're going to do 1 week of how to manifest. So we're going to take for 8 weeks, we're going to take a specific thing that is, common to every one of us. And we're going to allow the miracle in that area of our lives, so that there is no part of us saying no, and that every part of us is saying yes. And that's very important to create those miracles, those shifts in every aspect of our lives. And then you know what we're going to do on Thursday nights?
What's that?
On Thursday nights, we're going to do happiness exercises. You know how you do gym exercises to get your muscles stronger?
Yeah, I do that.
Yeah. Well, you know what? You've got the capacity for bliss, joy, and happiness within you. It has not been exercised because we have been traumatized.
Yes.
But as we move out of the trauma as a result of our transformations on Monday night, on Thursday nights, Spirit has designed some specific exercises that we can do and that we can continue to cause us to feel more happy, to cause us to maintain a higher level of happiness, that happiness will be constant and become our constant state.
You know, what I'm learning is that happiness is something we have to continually give to ourselves.
Exactly. And
yeah, we have to continually, we generally have to get out of the habit of terrorizing ourselves.
Exactly. And so the Monday night class, it eliminates all of those deep-seated areas of trauma so that we get into the habit of allowing the space, building the space, expanding the space of happiness in our lives.
I love that.
So these are happiness, these are specific spiritual exercises that we will do, and they're different ones each week. But each one enhances our level of happiness and our ability to maintain and sustain happiness. So that's
you can do some powerful work.
Absolutely.
Powerful work, yes.
But the challenge is that these classes sell out quickly. So that if this is something that is interesting to you, register sooner rather than later, today rather than tomorrow, because don't call me on Tuesday after they're sold out. Okay? And there are plenty of options. So check out my website or text me, and I'll share with you more about these exciting classes, but they will change your life. So that's what I'm working on. And I want to thank you once again, Ed, for being my guest tonight and working with this extremely important topic. And we're going to come back and do some more work with this later. But for now, I want to thank you. And I want to thank all our viewers here on The Miracle of Prosperity. Good night.
Good night.